My husband stood there laughing with his young mistress, calling me an angry black woman who thinks she's better than everyone, while I hid behind a pillar at his office party. The room went silent when I stepped out, locked eyes with him, and slowly removed my diamond ring. If you've ever felt invisible in your own marriage, or wondered when enough is truly enough, this story will shake you to your core. Hit that subscribe button, because what happens next will change how you see self-worth forever. Let's dive in. You know that feeling when your whole world crumbles in a single moment? When everything you thought you knew about your life turns out to be a beautiful lie? That's exactly what happened to me on a cold December evening at my husband's office Christmas party. But let me start from the beginning, because every ending has a story that deserves to be told. 8 years ago, I thought I had found my forever person. Daniel was everything I believed I wanted in a man: tall, ambitious, charming, and he pursued me like I was the only woman in the entire world. I was 26, climbing the corporate ladder as a marketing executive at a prestigious firm in downtown Atlanta. He was 31, building his real estate empire from the ground up, working 16-hour days and dreaming of becoming the biggest developer in the Southeast. We looked perfect together on paper, and for a long time, we felt perfect too. Those early days were like something out of a romantic movie. Daniel would show up at my office with coffee and croissants from my favorite bakery just because he knew I had a big presentation. He'd send flowers to my apartment with notes that said things like, "For the woman who's going to change the world," and "I'm so proud to call you mine." When I landed my first major client, a Fortune 500 company that had been impossible to crack, he took me to the most expensive restaurant in the city and told everyone we met that his girlfriend was a marketing genius. When I got promoted to senior executive at 28, he surprised me with a weekend getaway to Charleston and spent the entire trip talking about how lucky he was to have such a brilliant, driven partner. He would introduce me to his friends and business associates as my incredible wife, with genuine pride in his voice. I felt like I was living in a fairy tale where the prince actually appreciated the princess for her brain as much as her beauty. Those first few years were filled with late-night conversations about our dreams and ambitions, weekend adventures exploring new cities, and the kind of deep, soul-connecting love that made other couples stop and stare at us with envy. We built our life together with intention and excitement. We bought our first house when I was 29, a beautiful colonial in an upscale suburb with enough space for the family we planned to start someday. We combined our finances, our social circles, our entire futures. I supported his business ventures, and he celebrated my career victories. When he was stressed about a deal falling through, I would stay up all night helping him strategize. When I had to work late on a campaign, he would bring me dinner and sit with me until I finished. We were partners in every sense of the word. But somewhere around year 5, things started to shift in ways so subtle that I almost missed them entirely. It was like watching a flower wilt in slow motion, barely noticeable day by day, but devastating when you finally stepped back and saw the full picture. The compliments that used to flow freely became rare and eventually stopped altogether. The date nights that we used to plan with excitement became obligatory dinners where we sat across from each other in restaurants, scrolling through our phones instead of talking. The conversations that used to last for hours became surface-level discussions about grocery lists and utility bills. When I would try to share something exciting about my work, he'd nod absently while typing on his phone. When I suggested we plan a vacation to reconnect, he'd say we were both too busy and maybe next year. When I dressed up for him, choosing outfits I knew he used to love, he barely looked up from whatever he was doing. The man who once made me feel like the most fascinating woman alive started treating me like I was just another item on his daily to-do list. I convinced myself it was just the natural progression of marriage. Every married friend I had told me the same thing. The honeymoon phase doesn't last forever. Real love is about commitment through the boring times. All couples go through rough patches. I told myself he was just stressed about work, that the real estate market was going through a tough period, that he was dealing with financial pressures I didn't fully understand. So I tried harder, thinking that if I could just be a better wife, a more supportive partner, a less demanding woman, we could get back to the love we used to have. I started cooking elaborate dinners, planning surprise date nights that he'd agree to attend, but clearly didn't enjoy. Buying tickets to sports events he mentioned wanting to see. I suggested couples therapy, weekend getaways, even just walks around the neighborhood to talk without distractions. But the more effort I put in, the more distant he became. Like he was walking backward at the same pace I was walking forward, keeping the distance between us perfectly, painfully constant. The warning signs were there, glaring at me like neon lights in the darkness. But love and denial have a way of making you blind to the obvious. Daniel started going to the gym religiously, something he'd never shown interest in during our entire relationship. Suddenly, he was waking up at 5 in the morning to work out before the office, spending 2 hours every evening lifting weights and doing cardio. He claimed it was for his health, for stress relief, for better energy, but the timing felt suspicious. Along with the new fitness routine came a complete wardrobe overhaul, designer shirts, expensive cologne, perfectly tailored suits, even new underwear and socks. He started caring about his appearance in a way that seemed less about self-improvement and more about impressing someone specific. He would spend 20 minutes styling his hair in the morning, ask my opinion about ties, and then ignore my suggestions. Check his reflection obsessively whenever we passed mirrors or windows. But the most telling change was his relationship with his phone. That device became his constant companion, always face down on every surface, always password protected, always buzzing with notifications that would make him smile in ways I hadn't seen directed at me in months. He started taking it with him everywhere, including the bathroom, the garage when he was doing yard work, even on our occasional walks around the neighborhood. When I would joke about him being addicted to social media, he'd get defensive and accuse me of being controlling. The late nights at the office became more frequent and more elaborate in their explanations. Big deal closing with investors from California, he'd say, texting me at 9 p.m. that he wouldn't be home until midnight. Important client dinner that could change everything, he'd explain. Coming home smelling like expensive wine and perfume that wasn't mine. Team building event for the new hires, he'd claim. Returning from what was supposedly a company happy hour, looking like he'd been on a romantic date. I wanted to believe him desperately because the alternative was too painful to consider seriously. When you've built your entire adult life around someone, when you've intertwined your finances and your friendships and your future plans with theirs, admitting that they might be betraying you feels like admitting your own massive failure as a judge of character, as a wife, as a woman worthy of love. Then there were the smaller changes that cut deeper than I wanted to acknowledge. The way he'd subtly pull away when I tried to hold his hand while we were walking. The way he'd find increasingly creative excuses to avoid family gatherings with my parents and siblings, people he used to genuinely enjoy spending time with. The way he'd make seemingly innocent comments about my work being pretty demanding, or my ambition being a lot for some people to handle. Looking back now, I realize he was slowly, methodically chipping away at my confidence, making me feel smaller so he could feel bigger, preparing me to accept less so he could give less. But perhaps the cruelest part of his emotional manipulation was how he made me doubt my own instincts and perceptions. When I would gently bring up the growing distance between us, he'd turn the conversation around and make me the problem. "You're being paranoid," he'd say with a concerned expression that almost looked genuine. "You're imagining things because you're stressed about work," he'd suggest, making my very real observations sound like symptoms of mental instability. Maybe if you weren't always so focused on your career, we'd naturally spend more time together, he'd argue, conveniently forgetting that my success had contributed significantly to our comfortable lifestyle. He had mastered the art of gaslighting, making me question my own reality while presenting himself as the patient, long-suffering husband dealing with an unreasonable wife. Every concern I raised was met with deflection, minimization, or outright denial. Every attempt to address our problems was reframed as evidence of my own insecurities or unrealistic expectations. He had me convinced that I was the one damaging our marriage by expecting too much communication, too much affection, too much basic respect. The breaking point came at his company's annual Christmas party, an event I'd attended for 6 straight years and always enjoyed. For weeks leading up to it, Daniel had been unusually reluctant about me coming along. "It's just going to be a boring work thing," he'd said when I mentioned buying a new dress. "Honestly, you probably have better things to do than listen to real estate people talk shop all night," he'd suggested, which was strange because he usually loved showing off our life together at professional events. But I insisted on attending because I thought it might be an opportunity for us to reconnect in a social setting. Maybe seeing him in his professional element, meeting his newer colleagues, being his proud wife again, might remind us both of what we used to have together. I thought maybe we could remember how to be a team again, how to enjoy each other's company, how to feel like partners instead of strangers sharing a house. I spent 3 hours getting ready that night, trying on different outfits, doing my hair and makeup with the same care I used to take when we first started dating. I chose my black cocktail dress, the one he used to say made me look absolutely stunning, paired with the diamond earrings he'd given me for our 5th anniversary. I wanted to look beautiful for him, wanted him to see me the way he used to, wanted to feel desirable and valued and loved again. When I walked downstairs, Daniel was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone, wearing one of his new expensive suits. He looked up briefly, gave me a distracted nod, and said, "Ready?" without any warmth or appreciation. That should have been my first clue that the evening was destined to be a complete disaster. The party was held at the Grand Hyatt downtown, in an elegant ballroom with crystal chandeliers and panoramic city views. The moment we walked through the doors, Daniel's entire demeanor transformed dramatically. He became animated, social, charming with his colleagues, but I felt like an expensive accessory he'd brought along out of social obligation rather than genuine desire for my company. He would introduce me to people with all the enthusiasm of someone announcing the weather forecast. "This is my wife," he'd say flatly, then immediately pivot to discussing business deals or industry gossip, effectively excluding me from conversations and leaving me to make awkward small talk with strangers who clearly sensed the tension. That's when I first noticed her properly. Lisa. She couldn't have been more than 24 years old, with long, perfectly straight blonde hair, bright blue eyes, and one of those effortless smiles that seemed to light up entire rooms. She was Daniel's new assistant, someone he'd mentioned hiring a few months earlier, but had described as just some college graduate who needs basic admin experience. Seeing her in person, it was immediately obvious why he'd really hired her, and it had nothing to do with her administrative skills. She was everything I wasn't, everything I couldn't be, everything that represented a complete opposite to who I am. Young, where I was mature and experienced. Carefree and bubbly, where I was serious and focused. Petite and delicate, where I was tall and strong. White and traditionally beautiful, where I was black and powerful. She represented a fantasy, an escape from real adult responsibilities, a return to the kind of uncomplicated relationships men have in their 20s before life gets serious. I watched Daniel throughout the night, studying the way his entire face would change when she approached our conversations, the way he'd lean in attentively when she spoke, hanging on her every word like she was sharing profound wisdom instead of making small talk about weekend plans. The way he'd laugh at her jokes, even the ones that weren't particularly funny, with genuine delight. The way he'd find excuses to be near her, offering to get her drinks, introducing her to important clients, including her in discussions that were way above her professional level. It was like watching someone fall in love in real time, except that someone was my husband of 8 years, and he was falling for someone who wasn't me. The worst part was how obvious their attraction was to everyone else at the party. I could see the pitying looks from his longtime colleagues, people who had known us as a couple for years. I could sense the whispered conversations that would stop abruptly when I joined groups, the awkward silences when I asked questions about company developments, the careful way people avoided mentioning Lisa's name when I was within earshot. I felt like I was watching my marriage dissolve in public, surrounded by people who knew more about my husband's emotional life than I did. The humiliation was suffocating, but I kept trying to act normal, to play the role of the happy wife, to pretend I didn't notice what everyone else could see so clearly. After 2 hours of this torture, I needed air and space to collect myself. I stepped away from the main party area and found myself near the hotel's elegant bar, partially hidden behind one of those massive decorative pillars that fancy hotels use to create intimate conversation nooks. I was trying to decide whether to fake a headache and leave early, or stick it out for Daniel's sake when I heard their voices coming from just on the other side of the pillar. "She seems really nice," Lisa was saying. And even though I couldn't see her face, I could hear the fake sweetness dripping from her voice, the kind of false politeness young women use when they're talking about women they consider competition. Daniel laughed, and the sound cut through me like a physical weapon. It was a laugh I used to love, warm and genuine, but hearing it directed at her while discussing me felt like betrayal in its purest form. "Nice is one word for it," he said, and I could hear him moving closer to her, could picture him leaning against the bar with that charming smile he used to save for me. Honestly, she's become such a handful lately, always questioning where I am, always wanting to have these deep conversations about our relationship, always acting like she's better than everyone else just because she has some fancy job title. The words hit me like a series of physical blows, each one landing harder than the last. But he wasn't finished destroying me. "You know how some of these successful black women can be," he continued, and I felt my breath catch in my throat, my heart start pounding so violently I was sure they could hear it. Always angry about something, always demanding, always thinking they deserve the world just because they work hard. Like being ambitious gives them the right to be difficult and demanding in a relationship. I stood there frozen, feeling like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed my heart until it stopped beating. This was my husband, the man who had promised to love and honor me, the man who had held me while I cried about workplace discrimination and microaggressions, the man who had celebrated every promotion and professional victory with me. And now he was reducing me to racist stereotypes and cruel generalizations to impress a girl young enough to be his daughter. But he still wasn't done. I mean, I used to find her ambition attractive, you know? It was exciting to be with someone so driven and successful. But now it's just exhausting. She acts like her career is more important than our marriage, like she's doing me some kind of favor by being with me, instead of being grateful that a successful man chose her. And don't get me started on her attitude lately. Always so serious and intense about everything. Never just relaxed and fun and easy to be around like you are. Lisa giggled, a sound that made me physically nauseous, and I could hear her moving closer to him. "Well, you know you deserve someone who actually appreciates you, Daniel. Someone who makes you happy instead of making everything complicated and stressful." "Exactly," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice, could picture him looking at her with the expression he used to reserve for me. Someone who doesn't turn every conversation into a battle or a therapy session. Someone who's actually grateful to be with a successful man instead of competing with him all the time. Someone who understands that relationships should be fun and easy, not constant work. I stood there listening to my husband of 8 years systematically destroy every aspect of who I am, using my race, my professional success, my emotional intelligence, and my reasonable expectations against me. This was the man who had pursued me relentlessly, who had proposed by telling me he couldn't imagine building a life with anyone else. This was the man who had stood at an altar and promised to cherish me in sickness and in health, for better or worse. This was the man I had trusted with my heart, my body, my financial security, and my future, and he was using all of it, all of me, as ammunition to seduce another woman. Something inside me broke in that moment. Not just my heart, though that was certainly shattered beyond recognition, but something deeper and more fundamental. My trust in love itself, my faith that people mean what they say when they make promises, my belief that the person who claims to know you better than anyone else will actually stand by you when times get tough. I felt 8 years of marriage dissolve into nothing. 8 years of building a life together crumble into meaningless dust. But along with the devastating pain came something else, something unexpected and powerful. Clarity, crystal clear, undeniable, life-changing clarity about who this man really was and what I actually meant to him. All those months of self-doubt, of wondering if I was being paranoid or unreasonable, of trying harder and harder to save a marriage that was already dead. It all finally made perfect sense. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't being dramatic. I wasn't imagining problems that didn't exist. My instincts had been correct all along. This man had fallen out of love with me, had probably been emotionally cheating for months, and instead of having the courage and decency to tell me the truth, he had chosen to gaslight me into thinking I was the problem. I took a deep breath, smoothed down my dress, and stepped out from behind that pillar with my head held high. The look on Daniel's face when he saw me standing there will be burned into my memory forever. Pure terror mixed with guilt and shock, like he'd been caught committing a crime, which in many ways he had. His mouth literally fell open, and Lisa's face drained of all color as she realized I had heard every single word of their conversation. The ambient party noise seemed to fade into background static as I stood there, looking directly at my husband, letting the silence stretch between us like a chasm that could never be crossed again. Other people started to notice the tension, conversations stopping mid-sentence as they sensed drama unfolding in real time. Without saying a single word, I reached down and slowly, deliberately slid my wedding ring off my finger. The 3-carat diamond solitaire that had once symbolized forever, that I had worn every single day for 8 years, that I had treasured as the symbol of our unbreakable bond. I held it up so Daniel could see it clearly, making sure he understood exactly what was happening, then placed it gently on the polished bar counter with a soft clink that sounded like a gavel ending a trial. "Enjoy your evening," I said quietly, my voice steady and calm, despite the hurricane of emotions raging inside my chest. Then I turned and walked away, leaving my husband, his mistress, and the ruins of our marriage behind me forever. I heard him call my name, heard his footsteps following me across the marble floor, but I didn't stop, didn't turn around, didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me break down. I walked through that hotel lobby with my spine straight and my head high, got in my car, and drove directly to my sister's house on the other side of town. I didn't cry until I was safely in her guest room, with the door locked behind me. And even then, the tears weren't just tears of sadness or heartbreak. They were tears of relief. Relief that I finally knew the truth without any doubt or confusion. Relief that I didn't have to keep pretending our marriage was fixable. Relief that I could stop exhausting myself, trying to save something that had been dead for longer than I wanted to admit. Daniel didn't come home that night, probably because he knew I wouldn't be there, or maybe because he was too much of a coward to face what he had done. But when he finally showed up at my sister's house 2 days later, he found exactly what he should have expected. Divorce papers drawn up by the best attorney in the city, and a restraining order preventing him from contacting me directly. The begging started immediately and continued for weeks. Desperate phone calls to my sister's number since I'd blocked his. Text messages sent from different phones when he figured out I'd blocked his main number too. Showing up at my office building, my gym, my favorite coffee shop, anywhere he thought he might catch me off guard. He even started calling my parents, my friends, anyone who might be willing to advocate for him, or at least pass along his messages. His story kept changing depending on his audience. To my family, he claimed it was all a terrible misunderstanding, that he'd been drinking and said things he didn't mean just to fit in with younger colleagues. To our mutual friends, he insisted I had overreacted to innocent workplace flirting and was being unreasonable by refusing to go to counseling. To me, through intermediaries, he promised to cut all contact with Lisa, to quit his job if necessary, to do whatever it took to save our marriage. But here's what Daniel fundamentally didn't understand. You can't unsay words like that. You can't take back the moment when you reveal your true character. You can't apologize your way out of showing someone exactly how little you respect them, how willing you are to betray them, how easily you can reduce them to stereotypes and insults when it serves your purposes. All those months when I thought he was just distant or going through a rough patch, he was actually building a case against me in his mind. He was taking my strengths and reframing them as flaws, my successes and turning them into threats, my identity as a Black woman and weaponizing it against me. Every day that I was trying to save our marriage, he was already emotionally checked out and planning his exit strategy. The divorce proceedings were swift and decisive. Georgia is an equitable distribution state, which meant that everything we'd built together during our 8-year marriage got divided fairly. The house we'd bought together, the investment accounts we'd contributed to equally, the retirement funds we'd been building for our future, all of it got split right down the middle. Daniel was shocked to discover that his successful wife had actually been contributing more to our shared wealth than he'd realized or remembered. The funniest part of the entire situation came about 6 weeks after that disastrous Christmas party. Lisa, his young mistress, who had been so eager to console him about his difficult, demanding wife, suddenly decided she wasn't interested in being with him anymore. Turns out, when she realized that divorce meant Daniel would be losing half his assets, paying substantial alimony, and starting over financially in his early 40s, the successful real estate developer she thought she was stealing suddenly looked a lot less attractive. Without my income supporting our lifestyle, without the impressive house and luxury cars that had been jointly owned, without the social status that came from being part of a power couple, Daniel became just another middle-aged man with relationship baggage and financial obligations. Lisa had been attracted to the fantasy of our life together, not to him as an individual. And once that fantasy crumbled, she moved on to easier targets. As for me, I threw myself into rebuilding my life with an energy and focus I hadn't felt in years. Without the constant emotional drain of trying to save a dying marriage, without the stress of living with someone who was lying to me daily, without the exhaustion of constantly questioning my own perceptions and instincts, I found myself more creative, more productive, and more successful than I had ever been. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I got promoted to Vice President of Strategic Development, the youngest person in my company's history to reach that level. A year later, I bought my own house, a stunning contemporary in the hills with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the entire city skyline. I started traveling to places Daniel had always said we couldn't afford or didn't have time to visit. I reconnected with friends I had neglected while trying to be the perfect wife. I took up hobbies I'd abandoned, pursued interests he'd never shared, rediscovered parts of myself that had been dormant for years. Most importantly, I learned to trust my own instincts again. I realized that the woman Daniel had tried to diminish and discard was actually pretty extraordinary, strong enough to walk away from a comfortable life when it came at the cost of my self-respect, smart enough to recognize manipulation and gaslighting, even when it came from someone I loved, successful enough to rebuild my entire life from scratch and end up better than before. I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is refuse to accept less than you deserve. Sometimes walking away is the strongest choice you can make. Sometimes the person who promises to love you forever is actually incapable of loving anyone, including himself. Ladies, your worth isn't determined by how someone treats you when they think no one is watching. If this story resonated with you, smash that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Subscribe for more real stories about finding your strength and reclaiming your power. Remember, you teach people how to treat you by what you accept. What are you teaching the world about your value? I'll see you in the next one. And remember, you are worthy of love that doesn't require you to shrink yourself to receive it.